Jeff Grubb from GamesBeat, and we are playing Quake 2 RTX, which is out now on Steam. If you have the full version of Quake 2, you just go download this free thing in the Steam store, and you run it, and it will automatically turn your Quake 2 into the Quake 2 RTX, as long as you use the new launcher thing, which will either be on your desktop or it'll be that option in Steam. There are other ways to do it. You can look into it. If you don't own Quake 2, you can just go ahead and get this little demo and get the first 3 levels like it's shareware or something. But here's what we're looking at. We are looking at Quake 2 being updated. Quake 2 is an open source game now, so its source files are completely in the public for anyone to mess around with as long as they share what they're doing. And one of the people and one of the entities that went ahead and did something like that is NVIDIA. They grabbed this game and they added RTX ray tracing to it. And now that means that it has lighting that behaves in a more realistic way with the material and the world. Shoot that. That's what this is. It is just Quake 2, but the lighting is RTX lighting. And so you can see as my shot travels along there, it's creating its own light, and that light is reflecting off everything. But you can see it also, like, if you look at my gun, it like reflects off my gun as well. There are better ways to see that. Let's bring up this here. This is like a flare thing. You can see, like, look at the thing I'm holding. Actually, we could bring the gun back out. You can see as I turn around, the light hits the gun and bounces off and creates reflections, and that's what's happening in this entire game. Is this global illumination is bouncing off of everything and is creating light rays that behave in a realistic manner. Now, there's good ways to see how this is working, and NVIDIA has included a lot of those. We could turn off the denoiser. So this is like the noisy version. This is before denoising. Any commercial game that uses RTX lighting is going to denoise, which is one of the more intensive processes of trying to get the lighting to look right. But all this noise is, like, every single one of these dots is a ray going through the world and creating the light characteristics that you see. So there is light coming from here. You can see it's like the light is perfectly solid because every single one of those is a ray. And then that light bounces off of things around here, like the floor, and then that bounces off onto, like, this box. And you can see how the light is coming from here and from outside, and it shines in and it sort of blends together here, and it occludes around these corners. But then it comes through here and it hits this surface, and then it creates these, like, shadowy areas here where no light is really bouncing to. But I can light it up with my gun. If you want to see what the comparison looks like, let's go ahead and do that. So let's first turn on the denoiser, but then let's go to the Opengl version of the game. And it's going to freak out for a second. Hopefully the recording still just works. So this is what the game just looks like, with standard, pre-baked lighting. You can see the lighting here is it's whatever, but now there's a flash. And you can see that this lighting is still has a similar effect, but you can see that it's kind of creating this ball. Like, look how it hits the wall, and it creates, like, that shrinking circle of light. That's not how light actually works, right? I mean, in the real world, light never works like that. So with RTX, you could take all of these objects that have their material, like all these textures are in, like, the game engine. The game engine knows that this wall here is like a metal wall, and it knows what metal should do when light hits it. So when you do go and turn on RTX, now when the light hits it, it knows exactly what to do with it. And depending on, like, the strength of the light, or, like, where it's bouncing off of, or whether it's direct or indirect, it knows how to, like, make these textures appear different to deal with the results of that light. So global illumination is definitely the big thing here. And by big thing, I mean it's the most computationally intensive thing that's happening. And you could see, so there's all these numbers in the top left middle of the screen. That's like 3 directions that aren't necessarily all going to work together. But basically, yeah, the top left middle. And you can see that they are measuring the milliseconds to calculate various aspects of RTX. And it is the two most intense are the direct lighting and the indirect lighting at about 2.5 milliseconds and 5 milliseconds. That is the global illumination. That is like the light from the sun, a giant source of light out there, and all of these various lights in these rooms that whether I'm looking at them directly or whether or not they are bouncing off of things, like they're bouncing off the sky, the atmosphere, or they're bouncing off the landscape, or if they're bouncing off the geometry in this room, they're creating direct and indirect lighting, and that works by like this object exists right here, and my eye is the camera. So the ray goes from my eye, the camera, and it hits this texture, and then the rays like scatter out and they try to find a source of light. So they will find that light and this light and that light and all of this stuff, and then there's some indirect lighting out there and the light from the windows, and then it will delete all the other rays and it'll only keep the rays that bounce from my eye to the floor to a light outside, or to potentially to another indirect light source bouncing off a wall. And it uses that information to again determine what the pixel that makes up this particular section of the floor should look like. The reason that's so intense is because, I mean, it's happening all over these rooms, and it's happening whether I'm looking at something or not usually. And I don't necessarily, like, it's not like if I turn my back to this wall, it's not going to be calculating the rays from there because none of those are intersecting with my eye. But the light is still bouncing off these walls. So the calculation, like the physics in the geometry still needs to exist in this game, still needs to exist for the lighting model to function correctly. So it's much more intense than traditional lighting models. Now it's not just lighting. Global illumination is definitely the big thing here, and we could turn that off for a second just to see. You can see it's much flatter. This is just the standard lighting. So then what's left? Well, it's the reflections. They have some cool reflection elements here. You could see how it reflects the sky, and I could even see myself, and there's shadows. Like, I think shadow should still work because that's not necessarily a lighting thing. Yeah, you can see I'm like creating shadows depending on like where I am on the floor, or where I am compared to the light. And like that my shadow is blocking the light that is on this box. So now these boxes are getting shrouded in darkness. And that is, I mean, it's a very cool thing, but reflections are also similar. And you can see it looks pretty good. I'm gonna turn the global illumination back on though. Go to high. And you can see the effect, I think, is actually even better just because it really creates a more realistic landscape that then is also reflected, and it all just looks very good. Let's throw this in there. And you can see like how the light bounces all the way through that hallway. And like, even though I'm not looking at it anymore, that light is still being reflected out here onto the water. And so, I mean, that's multiple bounces to get out to me. And that's just wild. Now, here's one of the cool things. Actually, I don't know if... Oh, I can. Okay, cool. This is good. All right, so here's a really cool thing that ray tracing does. That is probably not something that people like that developers ever would have put in the game because it doesn't matter. But it is the way light works, and if you just program the materials to treat light in this way, it'll just work. This is the thing with RTX. Jensen's I can't remember his last name, but Jensen from NVIDIA, CEO, he gets on stage, he says, RTX just works. And this is an example of that. This is what he means. So the light is coming in from the ceiling, from outside. I don't even think the direct sun is even, I don't think we can even see it. So it's like, it's already kind of indirect. It is bouncing on these walls, coming down here, lighting up this room, creating this really cool lighting effect, also creating a sort of a really diffused shadow there because it's not direct lighting. But here's what I mean when I say it just works. So there's the fan, there's the light. If you go underwater, the perspective shifts because the light is bending as it goes through the water. So like look at how like the hole, okay, so this is the size of the hole now, and if I just go a little bit underwater, it gets much smaller because like the light is refracting and bending as it hits the surface of the water like a lens. And I don't think this is something you would put in other games because of course not. Why would you? It's just not like, it's not gameplay relevant. It's not something that most people are going to spend a lot of time looking at. But in RTX, with RTX, it just works, and that's really cool. Man, that's cool. Let's see here. And here, I mean, you can see how like the light changes depending on whether or not it's coming from above the water or below the water. I mean, it's all just, it's super impressive stuff, actually. And a researcher in Europe actually took Quake 2 earlier and did a path-traced version that really kind of did proof of concept here. And at the time, I was like, Quake 2 is one of the best ways to sell people on RTX. I think NVIDIA was like, I think Jeff Grubb is right. And so that's when it took its own chance to kind of add its specific RTX and ray tracing technology to the game and release it for free. And the result, I mean, I think the result is really, it kind of just, I don't know, it sells itself almost, because I like the buzzing of the red lights here is, no, I don't want to quit. Let's go back to OpenGL for a second. The buzzing of the red lights, I mean, it really works when it's like lighting up the entire underground here. So, I mean, you can see it's like, they're just barely lighting a small area around them. Nothing's bouncing around. The red light's not combining. But when you go back and you turn on RTX, it looks so much cooler. So yeah, I think like you could try to mess around with some of the things, like you could see like the indirect lighting now that we're inside and there's only a few very similar light sources, and you don't have to worry about the scatter of a giant sun outside. The indirect lighting cost is dropped to about like 2 milliseconds. So I mean, so there's a huge variability there. So you could see, and I think that kind of the peak there was like 5, maybe 5.5 milliseconds. Oh, I think I'm out of torches. Oh well. And so like, once you start getting up to like 5 milliseconds, that's like enough time where it's like it can really hurt your frames per second if it's stacked on top of everything. I'm running this on a 2080 Ti, and when I don't have the VSync on, which I have on just to make the recording work a little bit better, I was getting like 75, 80, maybe 90 frames per second because I have the global illumination set to high. If you turn that down to low, you'll get much higher than that. I guess much higher compared to, I mean, compared to this, I guess. It's not like, if you compare it to OpenGL, you'll get like 250, 300 million frames per second with a 2080 Ti. But that's kind of, I mean, it's apples and oranges. It really is. OpenGL, or traditional rendering methods without RTX, it's not calculating any of the light. It's not doing any of the work. Artists would have to go in there and do everything, and they're just not, because it's not worth it most of the time. But if you have a lighting model that does just work, you end up getting a lot of these really natural looking scenes that go above and beyond in making the entire scene just pop and look realistic. All right, let's see if there's anything else. Oh, we could do, let's turn off denoiser and the textures. There we go. This kind of gives an idea of like exactly what the lighting is doing. I don't know if this is still taking into consideration the materials of these objects, because the lighting would work differently depending on like what material the ground is made of. If it's like glass or sand or dirt or black marble or mirror, light behaves differently with that stuff. And so if it probably is just baked into below, like on the hierarchy of needs, it's probably below texture, so that when you remove the textures, the light's probably still behaving the way it should. So yeah, I mean, it really gives you an idea of like when something is this is really noisy out here because there's just not a lot of light in. Well, there's still a lot of light, but like you can see here, like my shadow, it's got a lot more gaps, a lot more noise gaps in there because there are fewer places where the light intersects with it and creates and creates the effect. But out here, where there's a light source right there, it's much more solid. Many like fewer gaps, and you could see though, like on the other side of these ridges of these embossed like tiles, like that's not painted on there. These shadows aren't painted on. They're not built into the texture. These are textureless things. So this is just like the 3D bump of the map itself. And you can see the light is bouncing around and not necessarily getting on the other side of these little ridges as much, and creating tiny little shadows for each and every little thing. That's some pretty cool stuff. And you can see I have multiple shadows here. Something no other game would give you, or no other lighting technology. No developer is going to bake in multiple shadows like this. That is just too cool. I got a shadow here, 2 shadows there. Yeah, so 1, 2, 3. I wonder if this shadow's anywhere. One, 2, 3, 4. Yep, look at that, 4 shadows. That is very cool. It's the kind of thing that just adds a sense of like, the world looks the way it's supposed to look, and my brain is catching on an animal level. Like it knows on an animal level this is the way it should look, and I don't even think about it, but just subconsciously you know. All right, so this is cool. This is RTX running in Quake 2, available now. You can check it out for yourself. Thanks for watching. I guess the last thing I was gonna try to see if I can get that indirect lighting thing to increase, but I just don't think it's not gonna. I don't have any flares left, so I can't really play around with the lighting too much, and I'm not gonna restart things. Basically, you really can't. It's hard to even if you add a couple of your own light sources, it's just it's not going to make that much of a difference, because the big thing is sort of like the sun, and just because the sun is going to have so many rays that can possibly intersect with it, because it's not just like one point. It's a giant, like it's a flat plane emitting tons of light rays, or a Missouri boom, depending on how you describe the technology, really. So yeah, it's not something you can like just affect. It's going to be like, it's just going to depend on where you are in the world, which means like developers actually should have some control over how it works. And I think there's going to be some horror games that like want to have a lot of shadows and dark areas with just like pops and splashes of color and light that are really going to be able to take advantage of RTX. And that's, I expect like a lot of developers, smaller developers, to use RTX first, beyond like NVIDIA partners, before we really see the technology take over in full. Okay, I'm going to wrap up, though. Thanks for watching. Jeff Grubb with GamesBeat. Until next time, have a good one, and goodbye.